So I'm sorry I don't have any PowerPoint presentation, but anyway, I hope you will follow my English, which is a French one. Anyway, hello everybody, and thank you for inviting me, Jaap and Marianne, for this session in order to address the question how interdisciplinary work can be fruitfully achieved. Well, it's a challenge, and it's I will just modestly propose some threads which I consider as important ones on the basis of my own experience of interdisciplinary work into project. But first, maybe I will present myself a little bit. After working in extension project in Africa and France, I was hired at INRA in the Science for Action and Development department. Why do I quote my department? It's just because it's an interdisciplinary department with sociologists, ecologists, agronomists, animal scientists, economists, sociologists, and so on. So what I want to say is that even if we are this interdisciplinary department since 40 years now, it's still a struggle to build interdisciplinary research. Myself, I have been trained as a plant scientist first, and then I did some sociology, and then completed my PhD in cognitive ergonomics. So this double training certainly influenced my willingness to develop interdisciplinary work, but I'm convinced that you don't need to have this double training in order to do some interdisciplinary work. So most of my research was developed as a cognitive ergonomics in strong interaction with plant scientists, it is to say agronomist, plant breeder, but also with management scientists, with sociologists, and less, I would say, with animal scientists. So I hope that my experience will nevertheless be useful to you. You will say it after the presentation anyway. Maybe I will first clarify my way to use some terms. Multi, inter, transdisciplinarity. So for me, as I think Jaap said, multidisciplinary work is seen as needed when we recognize that there is a single discipline which can't address the complexity of a problem. So that's the first point. But then when I speak about multidisciplinary work most of the time, I think that we assume that the object can be divided into subcomponents which a given discipline can better address. So one subcomponent by one discipline. And the relation between these subcomponents are stated at the beginning of the project, and each can work somehow separately on the subcomponent, and then the synthesis will be made at the end of the project with the results according to the way the relation were built at the start of the project between the subcomponents. In interdisciplinary work, and I will develop this later because that's the point Jaap asked me to develop, an issue is to acknowledge that each discipline has its own point of view on the object as a whole and its own way to develop its inquiry on the object. And it is assumed that such inquiry are not necessarily consistent and might result in a lack of ability to make links between the various obtained results. So I will discuss how then to achieve interdisciplinary work with this assumption at the beginning. And finally, in transdisciplinary work, non-scientists contribute to the projects, like in the Sapphire and the Feed Engine project. And it is recognized within the project that they carry inquiries on the object which are important to take on board in order to fully address the questions which are shared by them and the scientist. In my experience, I have also developed some transdisciplinary works, and you will see in the example I will present to you. Well, I don't want to make further discussion about inter, multi, and transdisciplinary. But if now I want to discuss about interdisciplinary project management and the main point I find important according to the experience I have of it. First point is about problem framing. If I look at the way you frame in both the project, you point the need for efficiency. Also, it hasn't been so emphasized here, so maybe by Marianne, but less by Jaap. But for efficiency or effectiveness, I will discuss about this formulation first because I find it quite open. It is to say that it is framed in a way which enables various disciplines to discuss their contribution to it. This is the first point, how to frame a problem in an open way, and how can the various disciplines discuss it and are invited to discuss the way to frame the problem. Just an example. When the agronomists involved in technology development, for example, decision support tools for farmers, they asked me to collaborate with them to support technology transfer. So how will it be acceptable, or how to transfer the technology? And they frame, by doing so, they frame the problem in a way which is not acceptable for me. Because in ergonomy, we analyze how technology are transformed by the users in the course of their action. Thus, this is not a question of transfer or of training, but it's a problem of how to co-develop the technology and the activity of the users so they manage still to perform their work efficiently without health problem, because for ergonomics, health is an issue. So we had to discuss and find a way to frame the problem so that we can work together about technology development and use. So we discussed it, and we framed it by saying how to create fruitful interaction between designers and of the tools, and users to co-develop the technology and its use. So that was just an example to say, when you start a project, you have to discuss all together how to frame the problem. Second point, value sharing. Most of the time we say that researchers don't have values because they are objectives, but I don't think so. And I guess you certainly admit that by pointing efficiency and effectiveness, the problem is formulated in a goal-driven way, and which draw an horizon to the work which you carry. But how did you, or do you still discuss about what effective and efficient means? In my view, effectiveness and efficiency are related to values, which underlie the way we decide what is effective and what is efficient. And discussing about values is important for me in interdisciplinary work. Let me also give you an example from my experience. I've been working on transition towards agroecology with ergonomists and agronomists in order to support advisors in their work with farmers around the reduction of pesticide use. And we discussed about what we consider useful to produce in terms of support. Some of us said, we need to produce methods and tools and to train advisors in their use. The others said, we need to support advisors in designing new interaction situations which have the potential to increase farmer ability to design low pesticide cropping system. If you look at these two positions, the first one is driven by values regarding the role of science, which is to offer robust methods. And also, I think that the people at the time were also regarding the urgency to achieve the reduction of pesticide, and thought we need to be there. The second one is driven by values which refer to long-term empowerment. They say that research is relevant to create the condition for continuous development of the ability of both advisors and farmers, because they might have to address other issues than just pesticide reduction. So you give them methods for pesticide reduction, but what will happen for climate change? What will happen for other sustainable issues? So that was different ways to value things, and we had to discuss this together in order to say how we will support advisors and farmers. So that was my second point, value sharing. Third point, I will say it's a need for awareness of our collective and respective way to reduce the real world. In the introduction, and I'm sorry if I make a mistake, but in the introductive abstract it is written, livestock production is an essential component of a sustainable food system. This is an assumption or a claim which the collective, I guess, involved in the project share. But this is the first way to define what I will call the problematic situation. Why do I call it a problematic situation? Because you, as a consortium, chose to cut into the real world and to reduce its complexity in order to start working. Indeed, by saying it is an essential component of sustainable food supply, somehow, and I'm sorry if it's not true, you don't take on board in your way to define the problematic situation all the discussions which currently take place about the place of meat and other animal products in our diet for ethical, environmental, and so on reasons. And actually, I don't discuss this choice because it's important to make this reduction. Otherwise, we can't work as researchers. So I just want that anyway, in doing such reduction, you close some option, and some option will not be addressed by the project. So this first reduction is one that I guess you collectively accepted. But then we have a second reduction which can occur and which is linked to our hypothesis and protocol that we use in our respective discipline in order to develop what I guess robust knowledge. And this second reduction are driven by our core hypothesis and by the methods we have to develop and to produce facts and proofs. And this second reduction characterizes the way each discipline builds its own inquiry about the problematic situation. And my experience is that it is important that participants to an interdisciplinary project accept to question and even renew their way to conduct inquiries on the object, to adopt some of the proposals made by other disciplines in order to better integrate the diversity of inquiry. As well, let me illustrate this with a project we built with agronomists and plant breeders to build new tools for assessing interaction between crop genotype and environment in the end of the 90s. So for us, we agreed upon the problematic situation, how to make better use of the information collected in cultivar assessment networks to optimize the size of these networks and choose cultivar which fit to the market and also to the various environments. All of us recognize that we had a common object of inquiry, which was crop genotype and environment interaction. But plant breeders consider crop genotype and environment interaction as a residual in their models, statistical model, and try to find the cultivar for which the residual was minimized. Agronomists claim that it was useful to analyze the interaction in order to better identify the way a given cultivar reacted to various environmental conditions. So they use models of yield elaboration and connect the obtained yield to a limiting condition, water stress, nitrogen stress, and so on. And myself, what did I do? I look at the way the various stakeholders perform their own analysis of crop genotype and environment interaction in their own organization. And I looked at different organizations such as plant breeding firms, Applied Research Institute, Cooperative Millers, and so on. So I will stop here first, but I can say, I hope you saw that we have different ways of looking at the same object. And this means that we didn't seek for the same information, we did not give the same room to what was done by the various users, we did not develop the same understanding of what for and how cultivar assessment is performed. So in order to develop a new assessment tool, we had to combine, and I will show you how we did it, to accept to be challenged. For example, the agronomist and the plant breeders say to me, but why do you need to know about stakeholders, what they value and how they do now? Because we will propose them some new knowledge and new ways to do. So it's not necessarily important to know how they do now. But I told them that I needed to have this in order to simulate new ways of assessing cultivar within the diversity of stakeholders' working situations. So it was taking on board their own interest, but as well taking on board my own interest. To achieve this, I see two conditions. The first condition, I would say, is being collectively reflexive. Because if interdisciplinary implies to accept being challenged by other disciplines, it means that we need to be reflexive about the assumption which we usually take for granted in a given disciplinary community. Without being reflexive on our own way to be part of a disciplinary community, without being reflexive about our own ability to discuss the taken for granted abstention and methodology, or how to bring in my own discipline the hybridization which I experience in an interdisciplinary work, how can I contribute to the project as a whole? So it means that collective reflexivity might be a key element in the process of interdisciplinary work. And the second condition is how to organize it, and my view is that it is supported by what I call intermediary object. So this is my experience, is that overcoming the reduction we all need to do, and in order to combine our respective ways to conduct inquiry, if we build a common intermediary object, for example, a model, an experimental device, a mock-up, a SURE protocol, whatever, we can support the discussion between the different disciplines on their way to grasp the object of inquiry and on their way to balance between robustness and relevance while building interpretation of a set of data collected through this inquiry. What do I mean by robustness? I refer to the way a given discipline shares some assumption and methodology in order to develop facts and proofs. And what I mean by relevance refers to the ability of the produced knowledge to overcome the problematic situation which was defined at the beginning of the project. If I develop further my example about cultural assessment, so as a collective, we had to decide how we will take on board the different point of view I expressed before. And also, because we worked with plant breeders, millers, and cooperatives and so on, we had to decide how to take on board the various stakeholders and their way to assess cultivar. So we had different discussion. We had discussion about how to combine statistical tools and which new tools we needed in order to both have the statistical power, which the plant breeder wanted, how also the statistical method can enable identification of limiting conditions, and also which kind of data the users can make as an input in this statistical model in their condition of work. So we did protocols for that. We also did protocols together in order to conduct interviews among the stakeholders in order to better capture their working context, but also to understand how statistics and model were used by them up to now and how they understand statistics in comparison to what the scientists do. And also we had a collective working session between all of us based on how the stakeholders assess their own database in order to make an evaluation or an assessment of the cultivar, because most of the time their database are not as complete as the one the scientists use. Developing this shared protocol enables us to build a compromise between our own requirements in order to build robust inference in our own discipline, but also in order to build relevant knowledge as our methodology tries to support the discussion between the different worldviews to connect them to the one of the stakeholders. So I see this kind of methodological device as a common intermediary object, common because it is not just a combination of our respective ways to collect data, but a new device in which we had this different data discussed together, and intermediary because we were able to use this device to put some light on our own way to interpret differently the data and to balance together between robustness and relevance. So let me conclude here, and I hope I haven't been too long. In my presentation, I propose some key dimensions to take care of during interdisciplinary project. I recall them: problem framing and value sharing, awareness about collective and disciplinary reduction, collective reflexivity on our own way to conduct inquiries, and intermediary objects as tool to support discussions about among the participants in order to balance between robustness and relevance. I also point out that this means some kind of attitude from the participant of the project, awareness on the assumptions and methodology which are taken for granted in their discipline, curiosity for the ones which underlie other disciplines, willingness to challenge the balance between robustness and relevance in my own discipline, and willingness to engage in the development of intermediary object and the discussion they necessarily imply. I see the role of the project leader as a knowledge broker. It is to say, someone who can offer the condition which will enable the debate among the participants. As a broker, he or she has a key role in supporting the development of intermediary object as means to promote such debate. He or she has a key role in supporting collective reflexivity, which also means to create opportunity to check the way the problem was framed and the way to, and also to go on with discussion about sharing values. But I said the project leader can assume this, but also other people in the project, if everyone is okay, that these are the kind of requirements that we all have in the project. And maybe I just want to finish with one point. Most of the time I heard that interdisciplinary work means trust between people. But my understanding of an interdisciplinary project is not that much trust between people, but it's trust in the process in which we are engaged, because interdisciplinary work is mainly made of uncertainty, a lot of uncertainty, and you need to trust the process in order to go on with such uncertainty. So if you want, also I did no presentation, PowerPoint, I have a small scheme, which I use with my PhD students in order to explain them all the notion I try to use in my presentation. So I can leave it to you. And also I just want to say that this is based on my experience, but also on other narratives that you can find in the Nature, Society, Science Journal, NSS Journal, and also, but it's in French, so maybe not very easy to read. And also, I use some of the work of philosophers like Leo Kutelek on the plurality of science, and of Isabel Stengers of science as a practice. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Marianne. One of the reasons that we invited you is also to open up. We are in both our projects mainly animal scientists, but not only. And I think it's very good to open up and have this awareness. As I mentioned before, we will have a panel discussion, so we have plenty of no, stay. We have plenty of time to discuss further with Marianne. But I first want to give you the opportunity to raise any questions you may have. Yes.
Thank you very much for a very inspiring talk, and it was a good lesson for me as an animal scientist to listen and not just to look at the PowerPoint. I'm used to it. Thanks for that. Some years ago, people had quite some trouble in explaining me the difference between a reflexivity with an X in it, and reflection with a C. Could you explain in a few words what you mean by collective reflexivity for us animal scientists and related scientists?
Well, I am not an English speaker, a native English speaker, so sometimes it's difficult for me to make the distinction. But my understanding of the difference is that reflection is just, reflecting in your mind, and while reflexivity means action after. So for me, it's not being reflexive just to think of what you are doing, but it's to improve what you will do later in the project. Is it clearer? So it's trying to find what kind of assumption you have in doing things, rather than reflecting on how you build your models. Well, I don't know, it's difficult to because when building your models, you do actions. but it's about, I would say it's about how I will make the next step in my work. And so what do I learn from the others and from the situation? So it's about learning from, and then in order to act differently, I would say, in my view, actually.
Thank you, Marianne. In the title, there is interdisciplinarity, but when the objective is also stakeholder involvement, it is not exactly the same issue. So you spoke about sharing values, but in many events, well, several events, I have seen which were organized to involve stakeholders. Generally, I don't find them successful because not so many stakeholders come that really don't say what is in their mind, and maybe that's because we have a too much interdisciplinary approach between scientists, and we don't make really we do not open the floor first to the stakeholders, but we have got in our project Image a survey of stakeholders, and I was very disappointed by their answers, which were not at all innovative. So then maybe we didn't ask the question in the right way, or I don't know, and when we have our meetings with stakeholders, it's about always the same, who come, who always say the same. So at the moment, I don't see the good recipe to make an efficient stakeholder involvement method. So can you help us on that?
Well, actually, sharing value doesn't mean shared value, okay? But at the same time, involvement of stakeholders for me is listening to how they look at the object. Well, sometimes it's not very innovative, but just listening how they frame themselves the problem. So that's the first point, but it's also an engagement on the long term with them. It's not only asking them questions, it's building the project with them. So it might be just a few of them, because you can't have, it depends your intention, but if you want to have too many people who don't agree on the future they want, and that's why I say that the first reduction is important, because the first one also gives the direction. So it gives how we decide that things will happen. Then you might be aware that this way of defining the direction or the horizon is not acceptable for other people in the society, and you have to take care of that in your project. But maybe you don't take all these stakeholders on board, because then you just can't. I mean, so maybe you have, for transdisciplinary work, you have to agree at least of the horizon you want to work on together with the stakeholder, and then also to make them part of the protocol buildings and things like that. I remember working with GEVES, which is one of our institution in France, and I said, we are not like, sorry, how do you call this? La souris, d'un coup j'ai un trou. La souris. And mouse. We are not mouse, which you have to observe. We are part of the project. So by being part of the project, we want to have our own possibility to say what we would consider as important to look at in the project. And I think it's also something important to accept that some of the protocols you build, well, the people you work with are people who have their own problems and own questions, and so to accept their anxiety about the problem and to take care of it and accept to learn together. So that's my understanding of how to take them on board.
Okay, I know there's more questions, but during the panel discussions we will have time and you can ask your questions, so keep it in mind or write it down for yourself. Let's thank Marianne again for her presentation.